I was almost surprised when I heard your TED Talk how optimistic you sounded about the ability of groups to reason together toward a common solution. Because I had heard about this thing that you do talk about in your paper called attitude polarization, and as I understand it, it's where being exposed to evidence contrary to your view and arguments contrary to your view actually makes you even more confident that you are right than you were before, right?
Yeah, so that's been shown to happen in some experiments. The issue is that that only happens, or that mostly happens when you're reading an argument. So let's say you're reading an argument from a newspaper you know whose political stance you disagree with, and then you read you read an op-ed, and what is going to polarize you is not just the mere fact of reading the argument that challenges your point of view, is that kind of automatically, as a reaction to that, you're going to generate a bunch of counter arguments. So you're going to think, no, this guy is so wrong for this, and that reason. And this generation of counter arguments is going to polarize, to make you think that you're even more right than you were before reading the piece. But our contention is that if you could actually talk to the guy who wrote the op-ed, he would be able, or she would be able to address many of these counter arguments, and there you shouldn't polarize anymore. So I think a lot of the problem is that we're not actually talking with people from the other side. We're seeing their arguments, and then we're processing them on our own. And we're not. I mean, it's rare enough that people don't talk politics all that much, maybe more in France than in the U.S. But because it can turn sour pretty easily, and it's considered maybe a bit rude and whatnot. And also because we're mostly surrounded by people who share our political views, and so you're mostly exposed to arguments from the other side without being able to talk to the person. So the argument might sound stupid because the argument was mostly kind of tailored for other people in that group, and so you think that for many reasons it's obviously completely retarded. But maybe in quite a few cases, I would say, if you could talk to the person who made the argument in the first place, you would realize that actually it's not that stupid, and that some, at least, of your counter arguments would be addressable, and therefore you change your mind of the person making the argument, and maybe potentially on the issue itself. And I think that's sort of what you see when you actually have groups talking with each other, rather than just people reading arguments in a newspaper or in an experiment. And although you can still have polarization, so if you take a group of extremely kind of people, strong Republicans and strong Democrats, and you have them talk about some really contentious issue together, they might quickly kind of stop talking to each other. They can stop. It's like a presidential debate in a way. People are talking to each other, but not really. I mean, we know it's just something they want to talk to the audience. But in many cases, still, people who've done experiments in deliberative democracy, so when they bring citizens together. And people from both sides of the political spectrum in the U.S. and they have them talk about policy issues. On the whole, it works quite well. So people do tend to become more homogeneous in their views, to become more understanding of where the other side thinks. So, and the evidence actually where things don't work so poorly.
Are there particular examples of this, well-known examples, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of empirical studies in which people have just, basically tried to take a random sample of the population, and you bring them together and you have them talk about, kind of social security or some kind of policy, and you measure their views before and after the discussion, and on the whole, it seems to work well. I think one of the examples that was the most striking is Fishkin did this. I think it was Fishkin who did this in Northern Ireland and they took Catholics and Protestants, and they had them talk about things that are quite sensitive, like education, and people they're very good at talking with each other and at finding common ground. Even it was it was pretty divided and pretty quite a bit worse than Republicans and Democrats. So the evidence there is really, I think, kind of supports this optimism.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, an experience we've had with this format. I mean, I started doing this about 10 years ago on the site bloggingheads.tv, and it's unmediated conversation. And we would bring together liberals and conservatives, and they would talk directly to each other. And that seemed to have a civilizing effect compared to the situation where there's a debate and a moderator. Because when there's like a moderator, who asks you a question, you don't have to direct your answer to the person you're arguing with. You're talking still to the moderator about the person, or to the audience about the person. And I think that kind of fails to evoke some kind of civilizing instincts that direct conversation does evoke. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, totally. I think what happens is largely that you have a different audience in mind. So it's like, in a presidential debate, clearly they're not talking to each other. They're talking to people who support them, to try to bolster them. And then when you have to make the effort to actually try to convince the person who is in front of you, so you have to understand their arguments in the first place. Even if it's only to try to reply to them, you have to understand them, and you have to try to find arguments that will talk to that person. And in the process, I mean, you do become kind of spontaneously nicer, and also, more understanding. I mean, you kind of have to, even if it's just for winning.